The great hall of the Voss pack had never been so silent. Hundreds of wolves, shifters, and pack elders stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the carved wooden beams, waiting for the mating ceremony to begin. At the center of it all stood Lyra Ashworth, her hands folded tightly in front of her, her spine straight, even though her heart was pounding so hard she feared everyone could hear it. Across from her stood Alpha King Damien Voss. He was everything the stories said he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and amber eyes that seemed to see straight through a person. He was also known for something else, something whispered in every corner of the Packlands. He had rejected 3 intended mates before her, 3 women, chosen by fate and by the elders, all sent home in shame. Lyra had heard the stories since she was a child. She had grown up watching her own mother wilt under the coldness of an alpha who never wanted her, who treated her like an obligation instead of a wife. Lyra had promised herself she would never let a man do that to her. She would never stand and wait to be discarded. So when the ceremonial priestess placed the ancient rejection scroll on the altar between them, the pack gasped. It was a rare and rarely used custom, meant for the intended mate to walk away first if they felt the bond was wrong. No one expected a bride to reach for it before the Alpha King even spoke. But Lyra did. Her hand trembled as she picked up the ceremonial quill. She could feel Damien's eyes on her, but she did not look up. She told herself this was the only way to keep her pride intact. If she was going to be rejected, she would not give him the satisfaction of doing it himself. She signed her name. The parchment glowed faintly gold, the old magic of the pack accepting her choice. And just like that, the mate bond that had been forming between them shattered. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. No one in living memory had ever seen a chosen mate reject an Alpha King. Damien said nothing. His face did not show anger, or sadness, or embarrassment. It showed nothing at all, which somehow felt worse. Lyra turned, lifted her chin, and walked straight out of the great hall, past the stunned elders, past the pack members who did not know whether to bow or stare. She did not look back. If she had, she might have seen the flicker in his amber eyes. Not relief, as everyone assumed, but something closer to shock, and beneath that, something that looked almost like loss. 3 days later, Lyra left the Voss Packlands entirely. She traveled far, past the mountains, past the rivers that marked pack borders, until she reached the neutral trading village of Ashen Hollow, a small town where wolves, humans, and other shifters lived together without pack law hanging over their heads. She found work under an old healer named Marin, learning how to grind herbs, set bones, and stitch wounds. It was hard work, but it was honest, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt like she belonged to herself. She told herself she was happy. She told herself the ache that sometimes crept into her chest late at night was simply the process of healing, nothing more. She told herself the same thing when, 3 weeks after arriving in Ashen Hollow, she began to feel strange. At first, it was small things. She grew tired far too easily, needing to rest in the middle of the day when she never had before. The smell of raw meat, which she had once handled without a second thought while helping Marin prepare remedies, now turned her stomach so badly she had to leave the room. Her wolf, usually a steady and familiar presence inside her, had gone quiet in a way that unsettled her, not silent from sickness, but silent the way a mother goes still and careful when something precious is near. Lyra ignored it for as long as she could. She blamed the travel, the new village, the stress of starting over. But Marin was not so easily fooled. The old healer had delivered enough pups in her long life to recognize the signs before Lyra was ready to admit them to herself. One evening, as Lyra sat pale and shaking after another wave of nausea, Marin knelt in front of her and gently lifted the hem of her shirt. There, just above her navel, was a faint silver mark, delicate as a snowflake, glowing so softly it could almost be missed. Marin's face went serious. "Lyra," she said quietly, "do you know what this mark means?" Lyra shook her head, though a cold feeling was already spreading through her chest. "It is a birthmark," Marin said, "not an ordinary one. This mark appears only in the direct bloodline of the Voss family. I have only ever seen it once before, on Damien Voss's own father when he was born." She paused, letting the words settle. Lyra, you are carrying a child, a royal heir." For a long moment, Lyra could not speak. The world seemed to tilt sideways. She had signed the rejection scroll. She had severed the mate bond before it could ever fully form. How could this be possible? Then the memory came back to her, one she had tried hard not to think about. The night before the ceremony, when she and Damien had been introduced for the very first time under the stars, before either of them knew what the following morning would bring. It had been brief, unplanned, and neither of them had spoken of it since. She had thought it meant nothing. She had thought it was simply two strangers caught in a moment neither fully understood. She had been wrong. The rejection scroll had severed the forming mate bond between her and Damien, but it could not erase what already existed. The child growing inside her was proof of that. Word travels fast in wolf territory, faster still when it concerns royal blood. Within a week, riders from the Voss pack arrived at the edges of Ashen Hollow, and behind them came the Alpha King himself. Lyra felt him before she saw him. Her wolf, so quiet and careful for weeks, suddenly stirred with a recognition that made her knees weak. She stepped out of Marin's small healing house, just as Damien crossed the village square, flanked by two of his most trusted generals, his expression tighter and more anxious than she had ever seen it. He stopped a few feet from her, his amber eyes moving over her face, and then, unmistakably, to the place where her hand rested protectively over her stomach. "It's true," he said quietly. It was not a question. Lyra lifted her chin, the same way she had the day she walked out of the Great Hall. "I did not come here to ask anything of you," she said. "I did not send word. I did not ask you to come." "I know," Damien said. "My wolf knew before any message could have reached me. The moment you came within range of the border, I felt it." His voice was rougher than she remembered, stripped of the coldness that had defined him at the ceremony. "I did not come to reclaim a Luna who rejected me, Lyra. I came because I could not stay away." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The villagers around them pretended not to stare, though everyone in Ashen Hollow now knew exactly who stood in their square. "Walk with me," Damien said finally. "Please." Lyra hesitated, but something in his voice, some rawness she had never heard from him before, made her nod. They walked together to the edge of the village, where the trees opened onto a quiet field overlooking the river. "I owe you the truth," Damien said, staring out at the water rather than at her. "About the others, about why I rejected them." Lyra said nothing, waiting. "There is a curse on my bloodline," he continued, "passed down for 3 generations. It says that any mate bond formed before a certain condition is met will bring death to the mate within a year. My father lost 2 mates to it, before my mother survived by pure chance. I swore I would never let that happen to someone I cared for." He finally turned to look at her. "The 3 women before you were not rejected out of cruelty. I sent them away to protect them. I let the pack believe I was cold and heartless, because the truth was worse. I could not risk loving someone only to watch the curse take them." "Then, why go through with the ceremony with me at all?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the elders believed the condition had finally been met," Damien said. "A trial, generations in the making, was completed the week before our ceremony, though I did not know it myself until after you had already gone. The curse was lifted, Lyra. There was no danger. I simply never had the chance to tell you, because you signed the scroll before I could say a word." Lyra felt something crack open in her chest, old anger and old grief rushing out at once. "You could have explained, before the ceremony. You could have told me something, anything, instead of standing there like a stranger while I was forced to guess." "You're right," Damien said, and to her surprise, there was no defensiveness in his voice, only quiet regret. "I was so used to protecting people through silence that I forgot silence can wound just as deeply as words. I am sorry, Lyra, truly." Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, though not from cold. "I didn't reject you out of hatred," she admitted finally. "I watched my mother spend her whole life waiting for an alpha who never once looked at her with warmth. I promised myself I would never wait to be unwanted. So I made the choice first, before you could make it for me." Damien's expression softened into something that looked almost like understanding, almost like recognition of a wound similar to his own. Then we were both trying to protect ourselves from the same kind of pain, he said. Just from different directions. They stood together in silence for a while, the river moving steadily beside them, the weight of everything unspoken, finally settling into something that could, perhaps, be repaired. There is something else, Damien said eventually. Pack law is clear. A royal heir cannot be raised outside the protection of the pack. I am required, by law and by duty, to bring you and the child home. Lyra tensed, old fears rising again, the fear of being pulled back into a life where her choices did not matter. But Damien held up a hand gently. I am not here to demand anything of you, Lyra. I will not force a bond, or a title, or a life you do not want. I am asking, only asking. Come home, not because law requires it, but because I would like the chance to know you, and to know our child, without titles or ceremonies standing between us. Whatever you decide about the rest, I will respect it. Lyra studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the coldness she remembered from the ceremony. She did not find it. In its place was something far more honest, something that looked like a man finally willing to be seen. I need time, she said quietly, not to decide whether I trust you, to decide who I want to become, now that everything has changed. Take all the time you need, Damien said. I will wait as long as it takes. It took 3 months. Lyra returned to the Vospak lands, not as a rejected bride slipping quietly back into the shadows, but as a healer continuing her training, as a woman carrying a child who belonged to the pack's future, and slowly, cautiously, as someone learning to trust the man who had once been a stranger to her. Damien kept his word. He did not push. He visited when invited, stayed away when asked, and slowly, through small, honest conversations rather than grand gestures, the two of them built something neither ceremony nor scroll had ever given them: understanding. On the day Lyra finally stood before the pack elders again, the great hall was just as full as it had been months before. But this time, there was no rejection scroll waiting on the altar. Lyra stood at the center of the room with Damien beside her, both of their hands resting gently over the small curve of her stomach, where new life continued to grow. The elders waited, uncertain what ceremony she intended to perform. Lyra did not sign anything. Instead, she spoke, her voice steady and clear, carrying through the silent hall. She spoke of choice, not duty, of understanding, not obligation. She spoke her own vow, unscripted, unforced, chosen freely this time, rather than assigned by fate or forced by fear. And when she finished, Damien took her hand, not as an alpha king claiming what was his, but as a man grateful to have earned, at last, the trust of the woman standing beside him. The pack did not need a scroll to know that this time, the bond between them was real.